So today we're going to be talking about playing small versus playing big. And the objective in this video today, we're going to walk you through a 3-step process that can help you identify low order thinking, help you identify pattern recognition, and to help you step into a higher order of thinking. Now, this is something that I've been working on for a couple of days now, because the idea of playing small versus playing big hit me, and I just went on a deep dive to really see what that meant and dissect that. And if you've been on my TikTok, you'd realize that I created a couple of different videos that were pertaining to this topic right here. And today we're going to break it down in a long form way, so that way we can help you to get to your desired reality, get to your desired outcome, and generally just give you some tools that you can use to help you along your journey. Because as you're going throughout life, things change, you change, life changes, and you have to be equipped for when those changes happen. And oftentimes what happens is we find ourselves operating in the same way that got us to where we are currently, but that way of thinking isn't going to help us to move forward and progress in our lives. So today we're going to help you to identify the patterns in your thinking currently that is keeping you stuck where you are. Because the thing that happens is when you're going along this journey and you start to realize, you know what, there are some things that I want to do in life, or there's more that I want out of life. What happens is we try to operate from the old frame of thinking to get to a new way of living, which requires a new way of thinking. So if you're feeling stuck right now, if you're feeling like, why am I not getting ahead even though I'm trying so hard? Well, we're going to help you identify that. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is what's called the baseline trap. And the baseline trap is basically when a person keeps living, thinking, and deciding from the same mental level that created their reality. So like I said before, you might be caught up in this trap right now. You might be caught up in your life and you want to move forward, but you keep on repeating the same cycle over and over and over again. You keep thinking the same thoughts over and over and over again, and you're just spinning your wheels, right? So like, this is you right here. Let's go ahead and erase this real quick first. All right. So, like I said before, the first thing we're going to identify first is the baseline trap. Oh, pull my thing up real quick. Gotta make sure that I'm on point. Yep, see, I'm writing in the area. I'm looking at my watch because I have a glare right here. So I'm trying to make sure I don't write in the glare so you can see what I'm writing down. So let's start with the baseline trap. So like I said before, the baseline trap is when you're living in a cycle of thought that is no longer serving you, and it's the original process that created the reality that you currently live in, but it's not the process that's going to help you to move forward and get to the next stage in your life. So like instance, this is you, right? And this is the thoughts that you used to have, right? This is the thoughts that got you to where you are right now. And this is the baseline that you're living on currently. But there's this new aspect of you, right? Hopefully I can see this. Yep. There's this new aspect of you, right? There's this new aspect of you that is living the life that you truly desire, right? But the problem is, to get you from here all the way over here, you're trying to use this old way of thinking to get you to this desired outcome. So when you're going throughout the journey, you're going up and down, up and down, up and down, but somehow or another you always end up coming back here and you're repeating the same process going up and down, up and down, up and down, and then coming right back to where you were already in the beginning. That is how the baseline trap works, because you're always going to come back to your baseline of thinking. So the objective today is to first off identify where your baseline may be, and then help you to change that baseline or grow that baseline. Because honestly, if this is your baseline right here, right? If this is your baseline right here, honestly, let's say this is your baseline, right? Your baseline stops right here. And the objective, like this is you right here, your baseline stops right here. And the objective is to break past this barrier that you built along the road and to increase your baseline so that way you can live in this now reality. So, this doesn't mean that, I'm gonna identify a couple of things for you, right? Just because you're living in this baseline reality, a lot of people have this ideology that they're lazy, or and not just you but other people around you. They have this idea like, oh, you're just lazy, or you just don't want it, or whatever the case is. But that's not the truth, right? It's not that you're lazy, it's just that you're operating from a limited thinking pattern. So this is not just your baseline, but this is also your thinking pattern. So these are like thought waves right here. So every time you're operating from these thought waves, you're always going to come back here, or yeah, it's just going to bounce off of this wall and just repeat itself over and over and over again. You know, every time you feel like you're getting close to that point in your life, or you're getting close to that thing that you really want to do in life, you always hit this wall and you come right back to your baseline. You come right back to where you first started. And then that starts to create fatigue, because you're getting tired of just trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And so now you become content. Now you become lazy. Now you're somewhat frustrated, and this creates bad habits, and it also creates vices too, because when you continuously hit this wall, you start to create vices for yourself, right? So you indulge in unhealthy habits, like maybe you're smoking, or maybe you're excessively drinking, maybe you're addicted to pornography, maybe you're indulging in things that don't really help you to grow. But when you don't have an idea about how to grow, when you don't have an understanding of the pattern that you're living in, your mind objectively goes towards these vices to feel some sort of peace, or feel some sort of ease, or feel some sort of quote unquote clarity. But really, in reality, this is not clarity. This is just clouded judgment. So you're just constantly creating this clouded judgment for yourself. So the main point behind this is playing small keeps you at the baseline version of yourself. So it's not that you don't have ambition. Sometimes it's just a refusal to think above your current level, right? It's just a refusal to think above your current level. So it's not the fact that you just keep hitting this line, right? In some cases, you're just refusing to grow, or something in you is refusing to allow you to get to that next level in your life, because you know it. Every time you feel it, every time you feel like, yo, I feel like I'm on the edge or on the cusp of something, something stops you. Something just gets in your way and says, no, you're not going any further. This is where you're going to stay. This is where we're going to keep you. And then you end up right back where you was. And then you start to give up. Then you start to lose hope. But you know what? Today, we're going to fix all that. I ain't gonna lie. This is like, I've done like this before, this style of teaching with a board, but I don't really do it often. So it's quite refreshing when you can actually see your thoughts drawn out, and it makes things a lot more clearer, because it's one thing to just talk about it, but when you're actually able to like see it drawn out, it starts to make more sense. So the next point we're going to talk about is the pattern. Am I writing in that bubble again? I am. We're going to talk about the pattern shift. I can do better. No, it's okay. All right, so next we're going to talk about the pattern shift. Now, the pattern shift is the moment a person stops seeing their life as a collection of isolated events and starts to recognize the patterns, systems, and decisions that they're producing in their current reality, right? So let me explain something to you when I say isolated events. When I say that you're thinking in these isolated events, I mean that you're looking at things that are happening in your life and you're not looking at the things that lead up to the moment that you realize something happened in your life. So that's why this next part is going to be pattern shift. The first part was to help you identify the fact that there is a problem in the way you're thinking. That's just an identifier to help you realize, like, you know what? Actually, there's a reason why I've been doing the things that I'm doing, right? So you have a baseline, you have an understanding of your baseline, you have an understanding of the fact that you're thinking in patterns. But now we're going to start to get into the different types of patterns. So there's isolated type of pattern of thinking, and then there's a pattern recognition where you start to realize that everything that happens in your life is a build-up to the moments that happen, that you experience, that you witness firsthand, that actually bring that awareness to you to say, what's going on, right? Beforehand, you didn't really realize all the things that you were doing. You were just moving unconsciously throughout your life, going about your day, yada, 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 woo-de-woo. And then all of a sudden, boom, you get smacked in the face with something in your life. And then it just wakes you up and you're like, whoa, wait, what is going on? What is happening right now? That is what I mean when I say isolated events. So this is you, right? Let's say this is you. And we're going to go back to the baseline, right? This is your baseline. This is your baseline. And then again, you're going through your day, you're walking throughout the day, boom, 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 and then boom, you hit that wall again, right? The thing that you don't recognize in the patterns is you don't recognize how right here from the start, this is the first one, right? How this led to this, which led to this, which led to this, which led to this, and so on and so on and so on, which led to this defining moment in your life, right? This is the moment that led to your life. But the problem is you're not focused on all of the patterns that happen in your life. No, you skip directly to the moment that happened in your life. And this is the isolated event, right? This is the isolated event that you're focused on. And then you ask yourself things like, why, right? You ask her things like, why? Why is this happening to me? Why did this happen? Why is this person talking to me that way? Why am I getting in trouble for something? Why? You know, isolated events always equate to why, right? You're always asking yourself the why question. Now, we're going to talk into the shift now. Now we're going to get into the shift. This is where the shift starts to happen. The shift starts to happen when you start to take account of all of the small events that lead up to the isolated event. So you start to shift from things like, why did this happen to me, to why does this keep happening? Or why does this keep happening? See, why, instead of saying, why did this happen to me? You ask yourself, why does this keep happening, right? You're not just focused on why did, right? Now you're focused on why does. See, why does is an isolated event. Why did is a pattern recognition, right? Or why did is an isolated event. Why does is a pattern recognition. So you're asking, why does this happen? 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 And at some point, when you're going through this whole process of asking yourself why, you create what's called a pattern disruption. So now you're disrupting the pattern of thought. Now you're disrupting, so this is your baseline again. Now you're disrupting right? You're causing a disruption in your pattern of thought. And as you continue to increase the disruptions in your patterns of thinking, you're increasing your baseline. So now you're going to get to the point where you recognize a pattern, you cause a disruption. You recognize a pattern, you cause a disruption. And at some point, you're going to get so close to the base, to the isolated event, that by the time you get there, all of the pattern recognitions that you've done, it's going to increase your baseline, because you're not going to get to the end of that event and then get the same result and then end up right back where you started. Now you push the needle forward. Now you start to see like, oh, okay, I see what led up to this point now. Okay, then you start to shift. And the thing about the shifts that happen in your life is that they're subtle. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that is like a drastic change, but it starts in the little habits. It starts in the little things. So it could be something so simple, right? It could be as simple as you waking up an extra hour early. If you used to waking up at 8 o'clock, you wake up at 7. It's like, because you see things differently. Like, there are different types of realities that you live in depending on the time that you wake up. Like, there's a reality for people who wake up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. That's a whole nother reality. There are people who start their day off at like 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. That's a whole nother reality. So that's just an example to show you that, okay, this is a way that I could possibly live my life. But that's just an example. You can start to recognize patterns in your own life and start to shift things. And then you can start to increase your baseline. So that way you can make the correct changes in your life to really live the life that you really truly desire. And the beautiful thing about that is, it's not only just changing the outcomes in your life, but it's changing the person that you are. And so that's the real key behind getting to that new reality that you want to live, is that you yourself have to change. It's not just your habits that have to change. It's not just the circumstances that have to change, or your environment, or the people that you talk to, or the way that you talk about yourself or people or things. It's you internally that has to change in order for all of your other circumstances to change. So let me tell you something real quick. Once you start to recognize certain patterns and start to shift and get into a more pattern recognition and pattern disruption, you'll start to see your own reality different. Like, if you go to work and it seems like everybody is just irritating to you, now you'll start to see everybody as like, you know what? This job ain't really that bad. Or, you know what? These people ain't really that bad. Because the thing about it is, you're just projecting the way that you feel onto others, and then they're projecting that feeling back to you, which is what's causing that irritation and that just annoyance of, I don't want to be here. But when you actually start to shift the reality within yourself, now you start to change the projection that you're putting out. And now the projection that's being brought back to you is letting you know that your reality is shifting. People actually treat you differently, treat you better. Work seems a little easier. You seem like you're getting paid a little bit more. You're like, wait, what is going on? You're waking up earlier. You got more energy. Wait, what's going on? You changed the pattern. A subtle shift in your reality can change the entire trajectory of your life. The entire trajectory. So the main point behind this is, you cannot change what you cannot see. You cannot change what you cannot see. Playing big happens when you stop reacting to moments and start studying your own patterns. So what I did just now is just gave you something that you can use to start studying the things that are happening in reality. But this kind of goes back to another lesson that I taught in a different video, which you can go check out, which is called the principle of recurring growth. Which I ain't gonna go there. I can tell you about it though. The principle of recurring growth is basically the patterns that you start to recognize in your growing process. You start off with yourself, then you start off with the identity shift, which your old reality starts to be introduced to your new reality. And then you start to come into the harmony or the integration process to integrate the two. Then you find harmony, then you find wholeness, and then you're back to that base level, but now your base has increased. You're not the same person as you was when you first started off. But that's a whole nother video. You can go check it out. And finally, we're going to get into the high order solution. Now, look, hold on, wait a minute. But my bad, this part's still kind of wet. There we go. The high order solution, right? So the high order solution, this is probably the best one right here. The high order solution is the process of rising above the thinking pattern that created your current reality and intentionally building a new identity, a new system, and a new way of operating. So the thing about it is, when you start to get into this pattern recognition, you start to ask yourself things like, what is this pattern trying to teach me? So again, we go back to who you are, right? This is your baseline. We're always going to come back to this, right? And these are all the patterns that are happening in your life, right? So now you start to look at each pattern to identify and extract the lesson in each one, so you can see how each pattern is affecting you. Now, the beautiful thing about this is, right, when you start to go through this process, your patterns start to shift from going like this to now they're rising higher, right? And they're going a little bit lower and they're rising higher, right? You're not just going through the motions anymore, you're rising higher. So now you're going above and beyond your baseline and you're creating a new baseline. So now you're going to have moments where you're just like, but then you rise above those things through the pattern recognition process, right? So you're just increasing your baseline now. You've just increased your baseline now, because you're not just only recognizing isolated events. You're not just doing pattern disruptions. You're actually asking yourself, what is this teaching me, right? You're asking yourself, what is this teaching me? Now, when you start to extract the lessons in everything that is happening in your reality, you can start to identify how you can shift yourself. Because at the end of the day, if you find yourself in certain situations with other people, you have to look at the part that you play, right? You have to look at the part that you play, because you are a definitive factor in every single scenario in your life. So even if it was like, I had nothing to do with that, you were still involved in it some way, somehow. So you have to figure out, what part did I play and how can I shift the narrative, right? How can I shift the narrative? And it doesn't have to be like something that you get in trouble with or nothing like that. But you have to be able to recognize the patterns that are happening in your life. You have to be able to recognize the shifts that happen in your life and in your reality. So that way you can start to be the creator, the co-creator of your reality, and not just responding or just reacting to the things that are happening in your reality. Because most of the times what happens is you're reacting to each and every one of these things. In the beginning stages, you're just reacting to each and every one of these processes, each and every one of these patterns, right? That's what always brings you back here, because of your reaction to everything. But once you actually start to respond, you can start to create all of the isolated pattern recognitions. You can actually start to see what is actually happening in your reality. You can actually start to identify isolated events and learn from those things, and then move forward from those things, right? So there are two ways to look at this, right? There's two ways to look at this. Everything that you're doing is gonna have some level of fear to it, right? And not fear in the sense of like you're scared, but fear in the sense of like it's gonna have some pressure. You're gonna feel some type of way, because either it's something you've never done before, or maybe you're just never been used to like facing difficult challenges. But now you're gonna start to feel these intensities, this pressure within you. And it's fear, but fear has an acronym, right? Fear is false evidence appearing real, which is the isolated term, or Fear is face everything and rise, which is the pattern recognition term. So once you actually start to see these things in your life, you can start to identify what aspect of your life do you want to live in, right? You can either live in the pressure of the fear and overcome it, or you can fall and get isolated in the pressure of fear and then fall back into that same old belief, that same old baseline. So the main point is the higher order solution is about using awareness, pattern recognition, and intentional action to become the version of yourself capable of creating a new reality. You cannot build a higher level life with the same level of thinking that kept you stuck. So, in conclusion, the baseline trap is the level you've been operating from. The pattern shift is the pattern that keeps repeating, and the higher order solution is, now that you see it, what are you going to become because of it? So I'm not telling you to just think bigger, but I'm actually showing you how to move from a lower state, a lower level of thinking, to a more higher level of thinking. Because once you start to shift and move into these higher levels, these higher realms, you will start to notice your reality shift subtly. And then all of a sudden it's like, boom, you start to get big shifts in your life. Maybe you start to get raises, you start to get better jobs, you start to get better opportunities, you start to connect with better people. It's like it's a compounding effect. Everything that you do in this process, it compounds over time. So now that you have this, my question is, now that you know this, my question is, what are you going to do about it? Because at the end of the day, it's all on you. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being on this journey with me, and thank you for allowing me to be on this journey with you. I hope you learned something today. And until next time, peace and progress.